My name is Max Gagliardi, and this is the Talk Energy Podcast. If you're watching this video, take a moment, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, or you can follow me on your favorite podcast app, leave a review. That helps the channel. You can follow our newsletter on Substack. That's Ancova, A-N-C-O-V-A, Energy Markets. We give you once a week updates on energy markets. You got pricing on there. We got commentary. We talk about all the craziness in the world. Check that out. Also, this episode is sponsored by my good friends at Digital Wildcatters for their upcoming event, Fuze. Fuze is going to be unlike any event you've ever seen in the energy industry. And it's not just oil and gas. It's people from all of the energy industry coming together in the energy capital of the world, Houston. The Digital Wildcatter guys know how to throw a party. Jake and Collin are killing it. And this event is going to be the best one that they've done. I'm going to be there. You should be there. Promo code MAX, that's M-A-X, that'll get you $100 off tickets. It's coming up on October 26th and 27th, and there's an opening party on the night of the 25th. Check out Fuze. This episode's guest is the man, the myth, the legend, Collin McLelland. I've wanted to have Collin on the podcast for a long time. He's been someone who's kind of like mentored me with the media stuff. I've talked to him a number of times about advice and like all the things that him and Jake have gone through. I've had Jake on the podcast. This is a really fun episode. We talk about the upcoming event Fuze. We talk about Collin's story, talk about entrepreneurship. We talk about all the things that he's had to go through to get them to where they are today. And there's this quote that he told me at the last conference that I saw him at Empower, which was an amazing event. Fuze is going to take it to the next level. He said that he just wants 50% of people to hate him, 40% of people to like him, and 10% of people to love him. And that sums up his attitude. And guess what? I'm in the 10%. This is a great episode. Glad you guys decided to check this one out. Hope you enjoy the show. Collin, welcome to Talk Energy. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, what's going on, my man? I feel like this is always the cliche start of a podcast. Like, yeah, thanks for having me on. There's not like a great way to introduce a podcast.
100%. It's you just kind of have like your routines that you get into, and you do them like every time. And you know, 100%. I'm always like really critical of the intros because it's me just kind of, you know, it's like the hardest to ease into it, and it's not just you, it's also the guest. But you've done a lot of these, and I've now have done a lot of these. So let's just
I think
get
this
into
is our
it.
first. I think this is our first time recording a podcast together.
It is. I did
surprisingly
one with Jake, but not with you yet.
Well, it's good to finally make it happen.
Yeah, it is good. It is good. We talk a lot offline, and they're good conversations. So figure we might get one recorded.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. So talk to me about Fuze. I mean, we're going to get into a lot on this episode, but I want to hear what all you guys have going on for this event. It's pretty exciting, and so I'll kind of open it up to you at first, and maybe just kind of like the origin of it, the concept, and then we'll get into the details.
Yeah, cool. So what Fuze is it's the South by Southwest of energy tech. And so we first came up with this idea back in 2018. We actually have a Google Doc where we wrote this idea down that the industry needs a South by Southwest style event where it's a festival and focuses on technology. And so, you know, obviously going through COVID, we couldn't do events, and then coming out of COVID, we now have the resources and the ability to do events like this. And so I think it's also really, it's very important with the timing too, that's with everything that's happening in the world in energy. And so, you know, our thesis here was, hey, let's get a environment where we can bring together all energy verticals. So whether it's oil and gas, renewables, hydrogen, geothermal, batteries and storage, and essentially have a good time with a lot of smart, forward-thinking people with a lot of good content injected into that. And so what we really do at Digital Wildcatters is we focus on building community and meaningful relationships, and events are a great way to do that. And we like giving these platforms to where people can really, you know, there's no friction. People can meet each other. And I think, you know, personally and as a company, what we think is that it's important for new energy sources to leverage the intellect and experience and wisdom that the most technical workforce in the world in oil and gas has. And so bringing these people together in one setting is something that the world really needs right now. You know, the world needs lots of energy from different sources, and it's all the people that are in the Digital Wildcatters community that are solving those challenges.
Absolutely. Well, I went to the event, the Empower Bitcoin event. Probably the coolest. I mean, not probably. It was the coolest, conference I'd been to in the kind of energy, oil and gas space. I know it wasn't just oil and gas. There was others there too, from like renewables and alternative energy. But it just had a way better vibe. I think how you've described Fuze to me, that this is going to be kind of like that, except even bigger. And it was great. There was like good people. The venues were well laid out. It had good, drinks and food and great speakers. So it was a good time, and it made me excited for this one. Go ahead.
Yeah, Empower, what it was a Bitcoin mining conference. So bringing together Bitcoin miners with energy producers. That had never been done before. No one had actually done that in an event setting. And, we take that approach of that festival style. We had it at a brewery. Fuze is going to be at the same location, but we're expanding. So we're going to have 4 blocks blocked off. The streets are blocked off. You have several different venues. You have all types of, we had 3 content tracks. So all types of conversations across the energy spectrum, and then all kinds of cool equipment. Like some of the most bleeding edge electric frac equipment is going to be out there from a few different companies. So lots of cool stuff to see. And I think one thing that sticks out to me about our events compared to some other traditional industry events is that industry events are typically in the convention centers, the George R. Brown centers, and everyone's, it's just very it's very rigid. And I'm a very extroverted person. I even find it awkward just to walk up to people and talk to them. And so we always took the approach of how can we actually make our event a party and remove that friction to where people can actually talk to each other. And I think that's what was so cool about Empower was, you had Bitcoin miners, people from Seattle and all different types of international countries came to Empower. And then you had your oil and gas subset, people like me and you and, Ryan Leachman and Justin Ballard and the Giga guys. And it was just a melting pot of different cultures and skill sets and bringing together everyone around a central topic. And you kind of see the magic that happened at Empower. It was just a lot of good conversations and collaboration, and we think that we can do that same thing across the broader energy spectrum with Fuze.
It absolutely was, and I think the thing that makes it such good conversations and good collaborations is that it was fun. It wasn't like this, the blue. Everybody's got the same blue blazer on in the convention center, and you're just kind of walking around picking up little stress balls that are shaped like oil drums or whatever they give out.
But this, Max. Why does everyone go to NAPE? They go to NAPE because they go to the after parties.
Right.
No one ever just comes to the event, and so our thinking was let's just reverse that. We'll make the event the party where everyone can have a good time, and we'll inject good content into that format.
Yeah, totally. One thing you said earlier that was interesting is that you've got all these technical people that are in oil and gas, and I've kind of said this for a while now. There seems to be this, rivalry or, kind of bad blood between the energy transition crowd and the traditional energy crowd. Fossil fuels, if you want to call them, oil and gas, even nuclear seems to be kind of lumped in. It's almost like renewable versus...
well, no, there's actually a 3-way. So this is the problem, is that renewables are the common denominator of the fighting because they hate nuclear and they hate oil and gas on Twitter. So there's actually a 3-way fight, and nuclear hates oil and gas.
Yeah, it's interesting, but I think the thing that the renewables and or energy transition people that want to push this new energy tech forward is that you got to look at what oil and gas people have done. Go back to the beginning of the shale revolution. There was a very common problem, and that problem was that we were running out of oil and gas. Everybody said this is an unsolvable problem. We're not going to be able to do it. And then there was all this innovation, all this new tech, and these very people in this industry, many of them young, a lot of people that I know of that are around our age or maybe even a little older, where that was the beginning of their career. So they went through this rapid innovation phase where they solved a lot of problems that many people in the world thought they could not solve. Seems like those are the kind of people you might be wanting to talk to and get ideas from if you're actually, trying to solve problems that people say are unsolvable and trying to revolutionize energy. That might be a good group of people to
a lot of people that are coming into the energy industry, especially in renewables, they're wet behind the ears, right? They haven't gone through the grinder like we have in oil and gas, and we've learned a lot from our experiences. And one thing I want to touch on right now is on the fighting topic. Most of our exposure, especially in places like Twitter, these online environments, there's a lot of fighting. Get this. Mike Umbro and Craig Lawrence, two of our friends over on Twitter. They hate each other on Twitter, but they met each other at the at one of the conventions, and I just wanted to be a fly on the wall to see that conversation. Guess what? They ended up having a beer and a great conversation and looking to help each other. And so we've seen this in our office all the time at Digital Wildcatters. You have just people from all different backgrounds and experiences and skill sets coming through our office, and there's oil and gas guys that have created energy storage solutions that sequester CO2 injected in a closed loop system, and that CO2 actually holds electrons. It's a battery storage. That's oil and gas guys creating that. You have oil and gas guys that are using DNA sequencing to take CO2 that's injected into reservoirs and create ethylene out of it. Like, it's oil and gas people that are creating some of the most advanced energy and climate tech solutions. And at the end of the day, like, when you get people in the same room together, you find out that you actually have a lot more in common than what you think. And so all the fighting on Twitter between oil and gas and renewables and nuclear, it's not productive, and the world needs more energy, and it's going to continue to need more energy as energy demand continues to scale and has the potential to scale infinitely. We don't know when we'll hit that peak. So I just really kind of push a mantra of pro-energy and trying to leverage all the skills and resources that we have in the oil and gas industry.
Well, you made a good point around just like the conversations, and when you get people together face to face. Craig has been on my podcast, and we talked before and after, and he was like real nervous, like coming on. He's like, "Oh man, I had all these like backs prepared because I thought we were going to get in like an argument or something." And then like you basically talk, and you realize that it's very easy to make a hyperbolic tweet that goes viral because you say some kind of like mic drop thing, and a bunch of your like stands jump on. They're like, "Yeah, like I love this." But what I found is that, I mean, like, I just had somebody on last episode who was like, used to be part of Extinction Rebellion. Like, they're the most hardcore, like, anti-fossil fuel people. And now she's doing like nuclear advocacy. And we talked like before the episode, during the episode, after the episode, saw eye to eye on a lot of things. Don't agree on everything, obviously, but
you don't have to either. Like, it's fine to disagree on things, right?
Absolutely. And then I got another guest coming on tomorrow who's very anti-fossil fuels as well. So I've been trying to bridge the gap a little bit. I have my biases. I'm trying to be honest about my biases. I think that I advocate for the things that I believe in, that I think work. But at the end of the day, if you can't hear someone else's perspective and you just want to get in a fight, then you're probably not going to make any progress there at all around the narratives. And nuance is everything nowadays. But want to talk about just some of the speaker lineup, some of the companies that are coming, just any of the highlights on Fuze that you can hit on for people, just about some of the people coming to talk.
I mean, we got some incredible people involved. So Toby Rice, CEO of EQT, is coming and talking about the future of LNG and what it can do for the world. Have Mike Skelly. When we put on this event, I was like, who do we need in renewables? Everyone said, it's Michael Skelly. And so we got Michael Skelly, Jane Strichter, who is she runs the Houston Energy Transition Initiative at Greater Houston Partnership, comes from BP. Absolutely amazing person. You got Tim Latimer. He's the CEO of Fervo Energy, which is one of the leading geothermal companies. So, man, and then you got technologies out there like Redshift. Redshift is using a plasma membrane to disassociate H2S molecules and produce hydrogen from H2S. That's cool. That's cool as hell to me. So you have just, I mean, an incredible mix of people and technologies that are coming together. And, I was talking to Kay McCall will be there as well, and she runs the Renewable Energy Alliance. And Kay was on my podcast on oil and gas startups, and it's funny because we're sitting there talking after the show, and I was telling her about this technology company that I really like. Their name's Lilac Solutions, and it's a lithium extraction technology that it's incredible. It's backed by Chris Sacca, and they take lithium out of brine water. So you know where we have a lot of brine water? Oil fields.
Yeah.
And there's some places that have a high concentration of lithium, and she had no idea that was even a thing. And so that's why it's so important to get people together from all sides, because there's a lot of opportunity out there. It's just about really getting people that have different perspectives and have seen different things, and you can start connecting the dots and putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
It's awesome. I saw Connor Prohaska on there. He's one of my good buddies from college. That's his older brother.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Connor's younger brother Joey was like a roommate of mine
Small world,
we were in
man.
the same fraternity. And I had Connor on the podcast like really early on, but his stuff that he did at the Department of Energy was really cool. Now I think he's doing like quantum computing stuff. He's just like dude. Connor's just such a stud. He's like
just a stud, man. Just smart people.
He was like president of his fraternity. He was the whatever the leader of the Corps or whatever at A&M. He was like the head guy of that. He's like, you know, worked in the Department of Energy as like CCO or something, like in his, you know, young in his career. Now is doing this quantum computing thing. He's a great guy.
I love it.
So that's a good one.
So yeah,
too.
you have those. I mean, just all kinds of people like that, both on the speaker list and just people that are attending. I mean, this is all high quality, top notch people that come to Fuze. And one thing I'm excited about Fuze too is, you know, at Digital Wildcatters, we've always been based around energy tech, and that's what gets us excited. And we have a Wildcatter World Cup. It's a tech pitch off. It's a tournament, and there'll be a cash prize. I think we're working up to $50,000, be non-dilutive cash just given to a startup. And so Devon Energy is part of that, Halliburton Labs, and looking at technologies all across the spectrum, both in oil and gas and renewables. And so that's one thing that stays core to us, is that we want to promote new technology.
All right, so if this hasn't sold you people listening already, go to Fuze. You can use a promo code MAX, M-A-X. You get $100 off. I'm sure there's other promo codes too. Whatever you do, just figure it out. It's the 26th and the 27th, right, Collin?
Yeah, 26th, 27th. There's an opening party the 25th, so would love to have y'all out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's shift it a little bit, but keep it in the same lane here. So you guys are taking this different approach with content, with events. I feel like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever you guys were doing it, I mean, I kind of started the podcast coming up on 2 years ago. I think people may have been more skeptical or more kind of like, oh, this isn't serious. These guys are just clowning around. I've seen a huge shift just personally. I mean, people, even like with my podcast, I had a lot of like people being like, hey man, you're going to kill your career. Like, what are you doing? Kind of like, they didn't straight say that, but it was sort of like insinuated, like, are you sure you know what you're doing? Like, this is not a, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then like when I would ask about you guys and Digital Wildcatters, I think people took it less seriously. Fast forward 2-3 years, now I feel like people see the light. They're like, what these guys are doing is awesome. People are having fun at these events. They realize that just because you're having fun doesn't mean it's not serious and it's not business.
Yes.
Have you guys seen that shift in over the years of doing what you're doing?
Absolutely. There's been a shift. I mean, it's funny, you talk about when you started your podcast, people told you that, you know, you're committing career suicide. I mean, Jake and I recorded our first podcast episode back in 2017. And it wasn't oil and gas startups. It was actually a completely unrelated podcast, but we started oil and gas startups in 2018. And, you know, it was very Joe Rogan style. I said, hey, I'm not going to have questions written up. We're just going to have conversations. I'm dropping F-bombs. I'm a roughneck from the oil field. I cuss. That's who I am. I'm genuine. I'm authentic. Yeah. And people are like, you can't say fuck on a podcast. I'm like, have you ever worked in the oil and gas or the finance industry? Right. I'm like, I don't think people are going to be offended by me cussing on my podcast.
Well, and then the people that were offended by that, they probably wouldn't have liked you anyways. Like, that's what I've said before. You and I have talked about this. It's like, find the people that love you, find the people that don't like you, and the goal is to find them as quickly as possible, because guess what? Like, they probably wouldn't have liked you anyways. So good. I'm glad I identified that.
It's a filter, right? So there's a really funny story about someone hating us, not seeing the light, and then becoming one of our biggest believers. And it's actually one of our investors. And so back in 2018, I bought some stripper wells, oil wells up in Oklahoma outside of Tulsa. And apparently I pulled the rug on these guys. They were trying to buy them, and I came in and swooped them. I had no idea. I didn't even negotiate the sale price. I just bought them. So these guys were just salty that we bought them. Then we recorded a YouTube vlog of us going and buying these wells, and they saw it. And they're like, who the hell are these guys? They come and buy these wells out from under us, and then they make a YouTube vlog on it. They just thought we were clowns. And one night I'm hanging out with one of them in a bar, and he was telling me this story. He's like, you guys were so far ahead of your time in creating content. He's like, we didn't understand it at the time. He's like, now we get it. He's like, now we get it. And now they're one of our best investors that we have at Digital Wildcatters. And so that's like my favorite, like turning a hater or a skeptic into a believer, because yeah, you're right, man. I mean, we never got respect in the early days. I would even say up until the last year. I mean, there's been a big change in the last year, I would say. And people are starting to understand the importance of content You and I know this. Content's the biggest form of leverage of our generation. It's very important for storytelling. And when you look at our internal mission at Digital Wildcatters, we want to change the way that the world thinks about energy. We want to raise energy IQ among society. How do you do that? You do it by making TikToks and talking on Twitter. We want to give a community platform and resources for energy professionals to go out and solve the world's energy and climate problems. We've done all of this through content and events, and people are starting to, I think, see they're starting to see the light.
100%. I mean, I just have seen it through personal relationships. I think that people now have kind of come around, and I think it takes time for people to really get it. And it's like, even within our business, we now see like leads coming in. We now go talk to people, and it's like, they know the podcast, or they know our newsletter, or they've like seen the social media posts. They feel like they know you. And I knew this kind of intuitively early on in my career, and I had this thought in my head, and I just always would be like, if I could just like get in front of that person, like if I just had a way to like, meet the person, if they could get to know me, I think I could get that deal done or get the business, or at least have a better probability of success. And what I found is that like when I went to conferences or did these things, it didn't take a lot. Like if you got in front of the right people, and if you're a good person who does good things at your job, then you can create those relationships. And it wasn't till later on that I realized that technology can be such a powerful tool to do that. And you're basically forming relationships with people without even meeting them. And then when you do meet them, it's like there's no friction. Like you're
building relationships at scale. And so when we started the Oil and Gas Startups podcast, honestly, we had no idea if anyone would listen to it or if there was a market for that. But we said, hey, at minimum, our selfish reasoning, we can get cool people in the room with us and we can talk to them. And what ended up happening was this paradigm shift in my networking, where all of a sudden all my networking was always 100% outbound. It flipped to almost 100% inbound. And it's very hard for me to walk into a conversation now where someone hasn't heard my podcast, seen some content, and it removes all that friction, like you said. And they come up, I've listened to every one of your shows, and boom, we just connect right there. And it's so powerful, right? I mean, you get to build these relationships at scale, and I just can't I can't tell how important that is.
It's great. I talked to Jake about some of this stuff when he was on. It was probably a year ago, so it's been a while. I know kind of your story. I've listened to your content. Just you can get into as much detail as you want, or the cliff notes, but kind of run through leading up to the entrepreneurial stuff and what you did. And then we're going to get into some entrepreneurial topics here in a minute.
Yeah, cool, man. I mean, I've always been an entrepreneur since I was a kid. I knew I was meant to build businesses, and I grew up in Midland, Texas. I graduated high school in 2008 in the Great Recession, and to be honest, I didn't know, even though my family, they're all landmen, I didn't know anything about oil and gas. And I knew I didn't want to go to university, so I didn't go to college, but I wanted to start a business. And I look around Midland, and I'm like, hey, you know what? There's a lot of rich motherfuckers that are in oil and gas. Maybe I should learn this. And, one night I'm at Gold's Gym.
Hold on real quick before you go to stopped on Gold's Gym, but I saw a headline on CNN or CBS or something. It was a Twitter headline, and I almost made a tweet, and it was like studies are showing that where you go to college is the highest factor in what your life success will be. And I was like, no, it's not. It's just it was the dumbest headline I've ever seen.
The credential system is falling apart,
just so
man.
Stupid.
Yeah, look, I am not against education. I continuously learn every single day. Right. But the credential system in the United States is so fucking broken.
It's stupid.
It's so broken.
So anyways, I interrupted
that we can record a whole nother podcast on that. But yeah, so I'm working out one night. My buddy from high school walks up to me, tells me he's got a job roughnecking, and he's making $80,000 a year, and we're 19 years old. I'm like, holy shit. It's like, I'm gonna go get on a drilling rig, and I get on there, and I remember my tool pusher telling me, he's like, this oil gets in your veins. I was like, what does that mean? He's like, you'll see, it gets in your veins. And look, here I am, 12, 13 years later, and oil definitely got in my veins, man. I got obsessed with the business. I wanted to learn all the economics. I wanted to learn the oil business from the ground up. And so learned how to drill wells. I learned how to complete wells. I got brought to Houston by a company in 2014. It was amazing because I got to go to deepwater drill ships in the Gulf of Mexico. I spent time on the North Slope of Alaska in blizzards up there. I worked on wells in the middle of Los Angeles. So I got to go to every
That's crazy.
every basin in the United States, every major oil field, and got a ton of great experience. And that's actually, I get asked a lot, like, how did I go from that to what we're doing today? And, back in 2014, I saw the rise of Instagram, and I started creating Instagram accounts, and it was like really cringy business motivational accounts, but the content, but it did really well back then. And so built up this one account, Words of Success, built it up to 300,000 followers, and started monetizing it by selling ads to people like Gary Vaynerchuk and other brands that wanted exposure. And that was like my first taste of creating content and monetizing it. And then one thing led to another, man. 2016, 2017 comes around. I have a realization that no one in oil and gas was putting out content. And I saw a wide open lane to start creating content, started doing it on LinkedIn, parlayed that into doing the podcast, parlayed that into doing live events. And, when we started the podcast back in 2018, I didn't know what would come from it, but I just knew that we had to be creating value and putting, I knew content was currency in the new economy, and we had to keep depositing quarters day after day, episode after episode. I knew something would come from that. And, that's what's what led to where we're at today, creating one of the most impactful networks in the world that's solving all these challenges. It started off with the podcast.
You've got this skill. Let me see if I can articulate it, because I think it's a really critical and important skill that all good entrepreneurs have. And it's the ability to see in the world around you the things that are working and do them better, right? And to take them. And so some people may be like, oh, that's just like stealing people's ideas. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's being like identifying trends, I think, maybe another way to articulate it. But for example, like there's plenty of smart, engineers or people like in the tech space, but they're not the ones who created the big, like, Zuckerberg's like the one that everybody likes to, it's like he didn't like come up with this idea to do what he did. He saw what other people were doing, and he said, here's how to make this better. Here's how to extrapolate on this trend. And he did some smart things that ultimately positioned him and his company to grow. I see that in you, because like we'll be at something, and I won't call out exactly what it was. I remember one time you're like, I like this thing that we're at, and you're like, I think I could do this, but I could do it better. And you just see the gears turning. You're like, this is cool, but like you're like, I think I could do this and like make it better. But that's kind of what being an entrepreneur is, and so like I think you're really good at that skill.
100%. Well, I appreciate that, man. And, if you look at any technological innovation too, like the other day I recorded this podcast, and it was a 101 on electrolysis and using electrolyzers to produce hydrogen. And the founder of this company, he used to work on nuclear submarines, and that's where he was first exposed to it. And I mean, he gave me a breakdown of the decade by decade technological advances that have built up to where we're at today in electrolysis. And you look at that, like, you're always building off of other ideas. And, for us, it's kind of funny. Barstool Sports, man. Barstool Sports was the inspiration for Digital Wildcatters. And back in 2020, the beginning of 2020, they got acquired by Penn National, which is a casino company. And Penn National had a gambling app that they wanted to release. But the problem was they had to go up against FanDuel and DraftKings. How are they going to do that? They needed distribution. Boom, they go acquire Barstool Sports. Now all of a sudden they have this super engaged community. And now they have all the content for distribution. And that set off so many just light bulbs in my mind, because I was like, oh, you create community through content and events, and now you can build products to serve that community. And that's where we're at now. And I always, I look for inspiration from other companies, other industries, other people. And I think it's kind of foolish to ever think that you just create something from nothing, right? I think, like, you look at Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, there was Friendster, there was Zynga, there was MySpace. I mean, there were a lot of other ones, and he just thought about what could be better. And I think that's, a big part of business is just looking for opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on distribution, and this is something that I didn't fully realize how powerful it was, just having these channels to distribute, whether it be a tweet or a newsletter, or ultimately all those things are really just ideas. Mm-hmm. And that's probably one of the most valuable things. And my biggest regret probably in business is that I just didn't start building distribution channels sooner. My only distribution channel was like my phone contacts. It was like, the people that I knew, like it was like the business cards that you got, right? The old school Rolodex, that was the distribution channel. And you put that contact in your phone, and then every 3-6 months you hit that person up to check in. Maybe you go grab a drink or whatever. But like a lot of these podcasts and things, or even just like media people on Twitter, like I've seen people that had like a huge following. They've got like 1 million followers, and then the next thing you know, they start a podcast, and right away, boom, it's like one of the top podcasts. It's not because it's really the top podcast. It's because they have distribution, and that's so powerful. And what you can do once you've built that is almost limitless. It's just building it is hard. So I think a lot of times with content, you get caught up in like, what is my content? Is this good content, bad content? Sometimes the good content can elevate itself and, overachieve. But a lot of times your content kind of tracks your distribution. And these are ideas we talked about in the past.
If you look at Mr. Beast, Mr. Beast is going to be the first billionaire made from YouTube. And you look at him. Someone had a tweet the other day that articulated this perfectly. He's doing Beast Burger, and my kids love it. Like, oh, we got to order Beast Burger. I'm like, it's not that great of a burger, but it's just Mr. Beast, so they like it. Yeah. And someone said, what's harder, building a platform the size of Mr. Beast or grilling a cheeseburger? And I was like, dude, that is so, that articulates it perfect. He's already built distribution on all these channels, and now essentially he's got an infinite product, he's got infinite distribution for any products.
100% of people, I don't know if people have noticed my stuff. I just am like, I have a lot of things that I'm always scheming on, like different businesses and ideas. And so it's like, they think it's just like an energy thing. But I'm like, actually, I'm just going to hit you up with this like Bitcoin mining thing that we're doing, or this real estate thing that we're doing. Because like you've built out the channel, and then like things come from that. So yeah, I see it, man. But your guys and what you did was inspiration, especially in the energy side, for me to keep it going too, because sometimes it can get difficult. And that's where I want to talk about it next. And I spoke with Jake a little bit about this, but just like talk about the uncertainty involved. This has always been my challenge, has been, someone that when you're back and you had a career, like say you were working on the rigs, you kind of knew, here's my role, here's where I'm going to be in 12 months, here's kind of this career path. When you're on your own, you're coming up with ideas, you don't know what's going to happen in 6 months. That's always been something that I just struggle with, that stress, and it always ends up okay. Maybe it ends up better than I thought, but how do you deal with just like the uncertainty and the treadmill nature of being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, there's a graph or a chart that lives in my head, and all it is regression to the mean. And so if you look at it, there's highs and lows, but you want to be trending up. And so on the days where it's a low day, which there's a lot of dark days when you're building companies. You just said, you don't know what's 6 months out. Man, when we were building Digital Wildcatters in the early days, we didn't know what was 2 weeks out. We didn't know if we were even going to stay alive for 2 weeks. And so lots of dark days there. And always just reminding myself that, hey, this is a long game. I want to trend up over time. And there's going to be regression to the mean. There's going to be low days. There's going to be high days. And so on the low days, just know that a better day is coming tomorrow. And on the high days, like try not to get too high on the momentum and success, because a bad day can be right around the corner. So I try to keep my emotions leveled out and always think about regression to the mean.
Seems like it's never as good or as bad as you make it out to be in your head, like what 100%. You think is going to happen. It's kind of like you think you're going to get some huge deal, and it like doesn't pan out as huge as you thought, or you think it's going to be a disaster, and then really wasn't that bad.
That's what, yeah. Life's actually just kind of like boring sometimes. It's like, it's like not either of those extremes. It's just kind of midline.
Yeah, definitely. How was the response? Just kind of jumping around here as it comes to me. How was the response from the renewable side whenever you told them about the Fuze event and that we're like bringing them together with oil and gas? And I only ask this because I feel like in the past, it seems like the renewable side is more bowed up. The oil and gas people like to clown, but it's like, I feel like the renewable side people, their message is really like, we have to stop these oil and gas people now or whatever. Like, has there been any pushback, or is it just the people you're talking to are the cool ones, so they were down to come in? Yeah,
man, it's a great question because I've seen a lot. And so I'm not going to speak, I'm not going to put out any blanket statements, but getting buy-in from the renewables was hard. Especially, some comments that we heard verbatim, like, we've heard this pitch before. We're going to come there and it's oil and gas just shitting on renewables. And that, that's a fair thing to be worried about. For us, it was super important to have, there's a few champions that have really helped us out. Kay McCall at the Renewable Energy Alliance and Jane Stricker at the Houston Energy Transition Initiative. Having them on our side and understanding, we're fully aligned in pro-energy and bringing all sides together. And, just what I've seen personally, like I said, having all these different types of people in our office is completely different than what I see on Twitter. You get people in the same room together, it's collaborative, and there's progress and there's opportunity. Get on Twitter, Twitter already has a negative undertone. It's a pessimistic platform by nature. Yeah. And so you get there, and like you said, it's a lot of mic drops. Look, I'm the king of mic drops. I know, there's no nuance, just come in and say something inflammatory and you get some likes. It's not like that in real life. And so we have had pushback from the renewables, but now, when we got Mike Skelly on, people are like, oh shit, okay, this is real. And so you just need a few people to buy in. And honestly, those people are the ones that are the catalysts for the industry moving forward. And, oil and gas, my thing on Twitter is I honestly think that renewables are obviously oil and gas folks, they bash on renewables a lot on Twitter, but the renewables folks, sometimes it seems that they have a hard time with objective thinking. And I've been making some comments lately about a lot of people on Twitter, they tout renewables are the cheapest form of energy and electricity. But the problem is they talk about it in a silo. They only talk about it from the power generation. And the fact is that we need storage and backup for if renewables were going to power 100% of the grid, they're intermittent. Yeah. You need storage and backup, and those things don't get priced in. And I said, I want full pricing end to end. And it reminds me of Shell. Shell, you tout 40% IRRs on a well at half cycle economics. You're like, oh, it's 40% IRR if you break out the land costs and G&A, and it's like, what the fuck are we doing here? No, what's the cost end to end? And I think I bring that up with renewables folks, and some of the comments I've got back is like, oh, well, if you build out the solar array, all you care about is generating an electron and how much you can charge for that. Storage is someone else's problem. And I'm like, yes, but as a society, as someone that is a consumer of energy and reliant on the grid, I care about what's the all-in cost to have reliable electricity, and storage is part of that. And so if we're comparing apples to apples on energy sources and energy density, then we need to look at things all in from end to end. And I think that people in renewables need to be able to, they just call me an oil boy sometimes. Oh, you're just biased, you're an oil boy. And I'm like, hey, we were bashing oil companies back on Twitter in 2018, so I don't want to hear it. We'll call out anyone, but that's I'd like to see a little bit more objective thinking in the renewable space for sure.
Well, and the thing you brought up is a really important point that I don't think that they fully get is that we know this game, right? The oil industry played it. It's like half cycle economics. People say this is a 100% IRR well, and it's like, yeah, if you just look at from this point forward and, basically don't load it with any general and administrative costs, you have the most rosy price deck in the world, right? You have midstream fees that are unrealistic that you're not going to achieve, and you don't count in all the lease costs that you had to buy these leases at the peak when they were way more expensive. They're worth less now. Then yeah, sure, it looks like a great rate of return. But it's you guys are playing the same game that we've seen played it's just the energy industry does it all the time. And I think that for me, renewables can make some arguments in some instances as to their benefits. What I get mad about is when they make these blanket statements, like you said, that we're the cheapest. I'm like, if you're making a widget that's 20% of the time and that's free, so solar or whatever, wind, and it's a free widget 20% of the time, that's great. But then the other 80% of the time, you can't even sell them from the factory. And by the way, all the other widgets you have to use to replace them cost way more because the free ones were subsidizing it or whatever. It's sure, you can point to when the sun's shining, it's really cheap, but you have to look at the full look at the full value chain there. And
that's that's what I really want to get to, a point of having critical thinking across the entire energy spectrum, so where we can have just genuine conversations, right? And talk about those things. Like, for instance, one thing that I think is a huge thing for renewables is the onshoring of manufacturing. This is happening. Manufacturing is coming back to the United States. It's coming back to Mexico. So Mexico and Texas are going to be huge manufacturing spots. And like, let me give you an example here. So the IRA has a subsidy in there that's $3 per kilogram of hydrogen. A lot of these companies can produce it for under $1. So as long as you're using green electricity for that electrolysis process, you can get this subsidy. Now, you bring in a steel plant, which has high emissions from producing steel, and fossil fuels are their input. You can co-locate all of this. You can have a wind turbine farm. You can have an electrolyzer to produce the hydrogen. You can get that subsidy for that hydrogen production. And then you can feed that hydrogen in as an input to steel manufacturing and bring down the emissions of producing that steel. And so that's something that I think is pretty cool for renewables. And, I also think that energy is very geographically based. So we have lots of wind, solar, and oil and gas in West Texas. We have no hydro, and so you got to use what you have at your disposal.
Right, and just be like honest about the pros and the cons. I mean, look, you can say coal is really cheap. Also, admit that coal has worse emissions, that not just for the climate stuff, but just to breathe in. Like, you would rather not be by a coal plant than a nat gas plant, or even a nuclear plant's probably the cleanest. So it's like, you can say both sides of the argument. Like, one thing I like to caveat with the ESG argument, because I'm always like, oh, these ESG policies, but then I'm like, yeah, and by the way, we lost money for the last decade too, so that also has to do with why we don't have any money that investors will put any money in. It's like, it's one thing to just pick on the ESG stuff and be like, the ESG people are starving us for capital, but it's and we lost money for 10 years.
The poor capital returns enable the very easy, we'll divest because we haven't made shit for money over there anyways. Right. So when all these endowment funds started getting all this pressure from their students, it was an easy decision for them because, hey, we get a win in the public eye, and we're not making any money over there anyways. And so I think what will be interesting, what we're already starting to see, is capital flowing back into the space now that there are returns being generated. And you're already starting to see a little backpedaling from some of the big PE firms that were very outspoken on ESG. So I think that'll be over the next 5 to 10 years, that's going to be really interesting to see how that all plays out.
It is. It's going to be interesting. I don't know what it feels like in the industry right now. I feel like we're back, but we're not really back. It's, I'm hoping that it seems like anytime there's these kind of different cycles, like the downtimes and the uptimes, it takes maybe a few years to ease into it. But, starting in probably 14, everybody was like, is this going to be quick? Are we really down? And then after a couple of years, you're like, all right, we really are languishing at these lower prices.
We're really here.
And so I feel like that's kind of how it is on this side of it. It's like, hey, is it really back? Like, our price is really back, and it just doesn't feel the same. And maybe this boom cycle won't feel the same. It's not the shale revolution 1.0 or whatever anymore. So it's like, I don't know, but what do you think? Like, does it feel like, from the people you talk to, like we're totally back now, or does it still feel a little weird? Because it feels weird to me, like we're not fully.
I'll say personally, this is the first time I felt like in my career, which, I say I go through 3 downturns because I was trying to get in an 08 downturn. And it's kind of wild that, 32-year-olds experience that many downturns. I'm a little, a little jaded, but this is the first time that I feel like there's structural support for a good run in energy. And the one thing that it's hard to compare it to any previous cycles because something that unprecedented happened with COVID, right? And the one thing that I knew coming out of COVID was that there was going to be massive bullwhip effects. And you've seen this in supply chains. I wouldn't doubt if we see it in energy. One thing I know about oil and gas is it can go down just as fast as it's come up. And we saw this with negative $37 oil. Like, negative $37 oil wasn't logical, but it still happened. Right. And so none of this makes sense in the short term. So anything can happen, but I do feel like just everything that's been happening, I think that we have some structural support for a while. But the bull effects, a couple of years in, and it could get real ugly again. So keeping that, when you've been through downturns like us, you always have that in the back of your mind of it's just creeping around the corner, right?
Is this real or not? The thing that it's hit me that I felt a couple of years ago, it was like, once you're in a downturn for a while, a couple things happen. Guys are like constantly drilling their best inventory because it's like we're struggling right now to make money, so we have to drill our next well has to be our best well, right? And then they're also not spending a lot of money on exploration, and they're not going out and making a ton of acquisitions typically. Those have sped up now, but it's like you just in your head, you kind of know, you're like, all right, well, you're not really doing much to fill the back end of the inventory, and you're drilling your best wells right now. And then after so many years, and we were like 7-8 years into that, right? And so at some point you're kind of like, hey, that catches up to you eventually. I'm not saying we're running out. I'm just saying that like it's setting up for more of a structural higher price environment, I think, just given what's happened in the last decade. Yeah,
I mean, I think people really underestimated how transformative the shale revolution was, right? And just how much oil and gas we were putting on the market. And look, the United States economy, most historic bull run of all time, that was fueled by cheap energy. And you know, a lot of people don't think about that. And you know, one thing I'm seeing in oil and gas that I don't really agree with is you talked about the inventory and the quality of rock, and I've seen some oil and gas like high grading their inventory and like, oh, this was tier 3 rock, but with $100 oil, it's now tier 1. I'm like, I don't agree with that. I don't think that that's the way that it works. And so yeah, we shoot through a lot of inventory. You know, I think that secondary recovery is super interesting. I think that, you know, when you realize that all these oil wells that we drill, you know, we get 4 or 5% recovery out of them. There's a lot of oil left underground, and how can we go back underground and in an economic fashion extract that remaining oil? That's super interesting to me. You know, my whole thing with like energy transition has always been like, even if you remove climate out of it, oil and gas is a finite resource. We don't know when peak supply is. We have no clue, but matter of fact is someday we run out of oil and gas. And so we need alternative energy sources. But it is really interesting to think about, if we could go back and recover all of that oil that we've left behind, you know, how much supply do we have?
Well, that's why we need smart people coming in and coming up with new ideas and brainstorming like there's going to be at Fuze. And I hate to do it, but I got to run here. We had a good 45 minutes in. We'll do more content soon. I'm going to be there. Hopefully everybody that listens to this is going to check it out. Tell everybody again the easiest way to get the tickets.
If you just go to digitalwildcatters.com /Fuze, you can find it there. You can find it from the homepage under events. Use Max's discount code. If you didn't get it, send me a message on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. We'll get you hooked up and hope to see everyone there.
All right, man. Thanks, Collin. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, man.